basically just pick it up?
Oh, I was.
Yeah, you were talking about the book, and you mentioned that your own childhood, there were some
Yeah,
adventures. Yeah.
wacky childhood. I had, Southern Gothic parents who could be quite strange. It's in the book, and but I had an older half brother who came to us. When I was like 7 or 8, he arrived, and he was like 15 or 16, and he eventually created this hot rod, and he became a hot rod gang leader. He had guns. He had a machine gun bed, which of course when you're a 7 and 8-year-old, you're wandering around. That's the place you go, is you go under people's beds. So I found the guns, and I couldn't carry anything. I could carry only the pistol, so I took that up to my mother. Hey, mommy, look. And but I remember, driving in the back roads of Minnesota, going. It seemed like 80 miles an hour, but with Elvis doing Hound Dog out, just blasting from the dashboard, and that was my introduction to rock and roll. So, it was about 5 or so years before I would actually then go on to buy records and shit like that. But so it's funny. I have a connection to the very earliest days and to later days.
Yeah, no, that's interesting, and I think that it just sort of depends on exactly how old somebody is, because they have either an Elvis story or a Beatles story, sometimes both. And
I have both. I saw the Beatles.
At what point did you see them? I know that they obviously stopped touring in ~66, but when did you see them? Oh, wow!
Second to last show, I saw them at Shea Stadium, and I went with my little friend, and his father was kind of an Irish mafia kind of guy, and he got us into the press box at the Beatles show. There was no press there, by the way.
Yeah,
that's how that it just didn't fit into mainstream press going to a rock concert in those days. So we were the only people in the press box.
Yeah.
My friend and I, and our 2 first dates.
Oh,
and you would think that would have meant more to the dates, but it didn't seem to.
No,
we were like 12 years old or something.
Yeah, they got to be in the same building as John and Paul and George and Ringo as well. But let's be honest as to what the hierarchy was. You can flip the 1 and 2, but if somebody told you Ringo was their favorite, they were probably lying. And I like Ringo. It's nothing about that. It's just 12-year-old girl isn't going to be like, oh yeah, Ringo's my favorite. But that's it's interesting because the Beatles as a live act. I mean, none of those recordings sound particularly good, and it's also sort of the earlier, really their earlier material. Like it's all pre-Rubber Soul, So it's like the stuff that you can find Hendrix doing Sgt. Pepper like the week after it came out, but other than the I guess the Rooftop at Apple Records or at Abbey Road is kind of like the only thing that they did late in the career. So yeah, it's just it's funny because you don't meet a lot of people. I only saw McCartney perform for the first time like, I don't know, 4 years ago, and
right.
He's still great. And I'm a very avid I'm a very avid meat eater, but there's something to be said when you're 74 and you can do a 3-hour concert and run around like he does and go, maybe there's something to being a vegetarian. I didn't learn the lesson that I'm going to give it a try, but maybe other people might want to. But so it's interesting because
and he fits into his old stage clothes.
Oh yeah, no, that's a great point. And obviously, working in rock magazines, you're going to have some very different kind of assignments. You'll write on Kiss, and I think that for a lot of people, at least especially of a certain era, it can be very eclectic, some of our tastes. I'm speaking of me personally. I did grow up really liking the music of Kiss, but because I grew up in New York State, but it's the really rural suburbs, like 4 miles from where I grew up was New Jersey, this little tiny town called Greenwood Lake, which is an old resort town. And so I grew up hearing Bruce Springsteen all the time. And so I can say that, sure, I love Kiss, but also I have a tremendous respect for Springsteen. And I know that you did a profile on him around the same time you did the Kiss book, right? And that's actually in there. So I just kind of wanted to get your thoughts on Bruce. Obviously, that's another 45 years in his career since then. But again, that moment in time, sitting down with, that's what, even before the river, that's like a very specific moment of Bruce Springsteen's career that you got to talk to him. And I was kind of wondering what that was like, and what kind of your enduring memories are from that.
Well, we kind of got to be friends, and it was the Darkness tour that I wrote that profile that was, and I thought, okay, I think this is the best thing I ever wrote. He was a great interview. I interviewed a million people. I remember going to interview Aerosmith, Steven and Joe back in the day, and they were just so high, and they were so silly, and it was just like, it's so useless. Worst interview I ever did was Journey. It was like, all right, I can't even write this fucking story. This is just, these guys are so dull. Before Steve Perry, but Bruce was great. He was a great interview. His shows were great. So it was 1978. I got to go on the bus from Houston to New Orleans to Jackson, Mississippi. And so it had all that. It was summer, and it had all that Southern flavor and kind of the crazy. It was so atmospheric to be in New Orleans with that band, and the way they respected New Orleans. And we went to Ernie Cato's bar, and he performed for us, and it was fantastic. So I wrote this story for Creem, and I thought, okay, that's like the best thing I've written. And then later it got anthologized and all this stuff. But after I wrote it, and Bruce and I became friends, and I remember he invited me down the shore, and I thought, oh, I don't know. First of all, I didn't have money for the train or the bus or anything. So I did not go. But I wrote this story for Creem, and when it came out, Bruce was doing his first date at Madison Square Garden. So it was a big kind of homecoming thing. And we were all going to meet with him afterwards. And we're back they've got us kind of in this employee cafeteria, a pretty big place in the garden, somewhere in the bowels of the garden. And there's all these rock stars and politicians and just fancy rich people, and just a big crowd. Everybody's going to get on the Springsteen bandwagon in New York. And Springsteen comes down after the show, and he walks in this big room full of people, and he sees us way in the back. We're at the fucking back wall table, and he walks across the room past all the politicians and rich people and rock stars, and sat down at the table and said, I just got to tell you, he says, that was the best story written about me since Landau wrote The Future of Rock. So, but I'll just never forget. So everybody's like, who the fuck are those people?
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
So, Bruce, we became friends and friendly, friendly,
Yeah, sure.
I was always skeptical of rock star friendships, but in the book, there's a story. Again, it's one of the ones that people think, oh, that seem like bullshit, or the ones that are absolutely factual. And there's a bracket, a beginning and end thing with Bruce, and that's almost exactly as it happened. Driving around Cleveland with a maniac friend of mine, I told Bruce invited me down to Cleveland to a show, and I got this crazy friend of mine to come to live there to give us a tour. And so we're driving around in this junker car in the afternoon in Cleveland, and it was a great afternoon. And so that's the intro to the book.
And so that story's in Loudmouth, story's
the intro to Loudmouth.
Great. And
it's also the closing, kind of the outro.
And the book will be published, I think, in the fall, is what the note said. So if people, obviously, you can always pre-order. 6th. You can pre-order everything these days. Pre-order
it, because they'll forget. If you don't pre-order it now, and you can go, if you corporate book selling, you can go to Amazon. You can go to bookshop.org, which is a consortium of indies, and it's all I've got all the links on my site, which is duncanwrites.com, and there's a tab for buy, B-I-B-U-Y. But Duncan writes like rights,
Like
not
rights,
like,
yeah. Well, and you know, that reminds me of you know, something that we, before we got disconnected, you were talking about the way that you started writing, and it was just kind of, you know, regurgitating all these ideas. And you mentioned On the Road, and what I always thought was fascinating about that book, and because, you know, I read that book at a very impressionable age. I was probably like 13 or 14, so it, you know, it's an interesting book, but it seems so important to you if you read it at that age. But just the idea that he would use Scotch tape and tape pages together so that he could keep typing without having to flip the page. I'm like, oh, I like that. And, you know, I always like the idea of writing like that. You know, I mean, now we don't have to worry about it, but this was a guy who invented his own word processor, you know? So
yeah,
anyway,
it's great. I have a funny story about,
go ahead. Yeah.
I have a funny story about that. 2 seconds. My wife, who been a rock, she's an artist, but she's also did rock photography, met a lot of people, but she also came from out in Coney Island, Brooklyn, and she had a guy, and a slightly older guy in high school, who was, his family was like gangsters and all this stuff, and he was always, shit was always happening around him, and he pursued her ardently. He's still around, and he still pursues her, but one day he brought over to her house that scroll from On the Road, and wanted to stash it under her bed.
Wow.
And to this day, she's not sure where he got it, how he got it, but eventually he came back and took it. I think I have a story about it in the book. Oh yeah, I made up that Jack came to get it, but the truth is, so she really did have the scroll, that scroll that you're talking about. That's
crazy that she had it and gave it back. You know, I think that shows shows restraint.
She's like, and this guy was like, she's like, oh shit, you know, no, I'm going to be arrested.
Robert, it has it's been a lot of fun to just hear these stories, and if these are any indication of what we can get from the book, I think everybody should make sure that they check out Loudmouth. And you said it's Duncan Writes, WRITES.com.
Right.
That's where they can find everything. And
that's where you can get the links to pre-order.
Yeah, right. So that means that literally right now, before I finish this sentence, you could just click on a button and order it. So you might as well do that right now. You know, don't wait till October 5th. Why would you do that to yourself?
Right.
Robert, thank you so much. I do really appreciate it, and good luck with the book. And I look forward to having an occasion to talk to you again soon. Thanks so much.
Well, I hope so. Thank you, Christian.